Picture a modern, booming metropolis. Think of the New York City skyline at night, just glowing with electricity, humming with millions of people, projecting this immense wealth and global power. Okay, hold that image in your head and suddenly jump cut back to a silent, freezing, foggy forest in the 1600s. Deep, quiet, completely isolated. It's an absolutely incredible contrast, right? Today, we're diving into an explainer of a 400-year history that goes way beyond your standard maps and borders. This is the story of a series of unbelievable accidents, desperate gambles, and a rise to power that literally no one, not even the very first explorers who set foot here, ever saw coming.
It sounds a bit like alternate history to ask, what if the world's most powerful nation just didn't exist? But for a really long time, that was reality. Before 1492, maps showed nothing but open ocean between Europe and Asia. When Columbus finally hit land, he wasn't looking to plant a flag and build some grand new civilization. No way. He was desperately looking for a shortcut to Indian spices. The guy literally bumped into an entire continent while looking for pepper and nutmeg. And he actually died believing he'd reached Asia, leaving behind a landmass that the world's superpowers basically viewed as a geopolitical parking lot. They thought it was completely useless. So how on earth did a handful of struggling, isolated colonies on a landmass nobody wanted become the wealthiest nation in human history?
Chapter 1. The Forgotten North, 1492 to 1750.
During those early years, the global powers were entirely focused elsewhere. Spain was busy extracting massive amounts of gold and silver out of South America, and they looked up at the north and saw absolutely nothing of value, just useless wilderness. And because of that, there is this staggering, almost 100-year gap between Columbus landing and the first real English attempt to settle in the 1580s at Roanoke. And that settlement literally vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but mystery. The sheer precariousness of survival meant it really wasn't until the 1600s that things began to actually stick, right? With the planting of tobacco in Jamestown and those winter-hardened pilgrims arriving in Plymouth. It was a slow, agonizing start, a whole century where everyone just kind of ignored it. But beneath the surface, completely unseen by the empires of the world, the roots of a new society were quietly taking hold. Chapter 2. The Spark of Rebellion, 1754 to 1789. Now, what's really interesting about this next phase is how that quiet, forgotten wilderness eventually morphed into a massive powder keg.
By 1754, the British and French are clashing in a brutal struggle for the heart of the continent, the French and Indian War. Britain ultimately pulls off the win by 1763, but that victory, it came with a catastrophic price tag. And this is where the story shifts from noble ideals to a colossal, accidental miscalculation. The British king is desperate to pay off this massive war debt, so he reaches right into the pockets of the colonists. The British Empire essentially tripped over its own ledger books, accidentally giving birth to its future replacement. This simple miscalculation ignited a revolution, led by figures like George Washington, leading directly to 1776, when 13 divided colonies did the unthinkable and declared independence. And by 1789, with a brand new constitution, the United States was officially on the map.
Chapter 3. The Great Gamble, 1803 to 1848.
Just simply existing wasn't going to cut it anymore. This young, scrappy nation was incredibly hungry for space. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, you have a desperate Napoleon Bonaparte staring at maps of Europe, severely needing cash to fund his devastating wars. So in 1803, the United States takes full advantage of Napoleon's desperation in this massive geopolitical gamble, the Louisiana Purchase. For $15 million, the U.S. doubled its physical size overnight. To put that staggering number into perspective, that breaks down to roughly 3 cents an acre. 3 cents! This wasn't some carefully orchestrated master plan of expansion. It was a lucky, unparalleled geopolitical garage sale. And that hunger for land quickly evolved into an aggressive, unstoppable psychological momentum. They simply decided they were entitled to an entire continent. The audacity is pretty remarkable. In a rapid-fire push, they claimed Texas, fought a war with Mexico, negotiated to split the Oregon Territory with the British, and ultimately reached the Pacific coast. It's wild to think about. In just 50 years, this new nation ruthlessly carved a continuous path all the way across the continent, from ocean to ocean.
Chapter 4. A House Divided, 1860 to 1865. But that relentless outward momentum masked a deeply devastating internal cost. As the nation grabbed land and pushed its borders outward, it was fundamentally rotting from within. The question of slavery had become an absolute firestorm, tearing at the very fabric of the country. When Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860, the tension hit its breaking point and the country snapped right in two. The Union versus the Confederacy, brother against brother. The Civil War was the bloodiest chapter in American history, and it was the moment this accidental empire very nearly unmade itself entirely. But there's a crucial geopolitical insight here. To survive this near-death experience, the North had to forge a massive, centralized industrial war machine to defeat the South. Winning the war and freeing the slaves preserved the Union, but ironically, it also primed this battered, recovering nation with the heavy industry and infrastructure it would need for global dominance.
Chapter 5. The Global Giant, 1867 to 1914.
With its internal fires finally extinguished, this newly reunited nation immediately lifted its head, looked to the horizon, and set its sights outward. And the sheer speed of this pivot is just breathtaking. First, they're buying the icy landscape of Alaska from a cash-strapped Russian czar, then they're annexing the tropical islands of Hawaii. But 1898, that was the true turning point. A mysterious explosion of an American warship, the USS Maine, cascaded into a sudden war with Spain. In just a matter of months, the U.S. accidentally inherited the remnants of the old Spanish Empire, taking Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. By the time Theodore Roosevelt was using massive machinery to carve out the Panama Canal, the message was undeniably clear. America was no longer just a collection of rebellious colonies, it was a bona fide world power.
Every step of the way, the world underestimated this accidental empire. It started as a mistake by Columbus. The Spanish thought the North was a wasteland. The British assumed the colonists would just passively pay their war debts. From the freezing, desperate winters of Valley Forge to the chaotic, sun-drenched goldfields of California, the rise of the United States wasn't just about careful strategy or winning wars. It was a journey defined by sheer luck, incredible grit, and a relentless, almost unstoppable momentum of a people who continuously capitalized on the world's miscalculations.
So in just 4 centuries, this land went from a series of disappearing, struggling settlements to the absolute center of global trade, military might, and political influence. But looking back over these 400 years, history leaves us with a stark warning. The harder it is to build an empire, the more complex it becomes to hold it together. The borders might be drawn and the coasts might be connected, the map is finished, but the story is far from over. Considering the fragile series of accidents that built it all, what does it actually take to maintain a global superpower today?